Any student must be allowed in any space or risk the loss of federal funding. That's what both public and private schools are now facing under the Biden administration's new interpretation of Title IX.
States are pushing back on the new requirements for schools regarding students who identify as transgender. Yesterday, 20 attorneys general sued the administration over a policy that could affect school meal programs. Heather Sells has the story.
The Biden administration wants all schools that receive federal help to provide open access to bathrooms, locker rooms, and sports based on students' self-perceived gender identity. That desire, however, is hitting some legal roadblocks.
There's really no compromise. Sex is either male or female, or as the Biden administration is putting forward, the idea of sex can be overridden by gender identity. And gender identity is simply your self-perception.
Attorney Mary Rice Hassan has followed the administration's new interpretation of Title IX, a rule which flips the traditional understanding of sex-segregated spaces. The change forces both public and private schools that rely on federal funding to comply.
It's a confusing time for educators, both anyone who receives federal money.
That financial pipeline is worth millions, even billions to some states. Tennessee, for example, receives $1.5 billion a year for K through 12, and its universities receive $88 million. It's why the state's attorney general has led 19 other states to fight the education department over its 2021 reinterpretation of Title IX. They argue that the Biden administration wrongly expanded on a 2020 Supreme Court decision known as Bostock. That ruling stated that under federal employment law, sex discrimination includes gender identity and sexual orientation. The Biden administration has expanded Bostock's reach to include Title IX and education. In early July, those 20 states got a reprieve when a federal judge put a temporary hold on the Biden administration's reinterpretation.
The federal court made really clear that the Biden administration had taken Bostock too far.
Attorney Christiana Kiefer has defended female track athletes forced to compete against boys in Connecticut. In September, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals will hear arguments in that case. For now, the states that sued the Biden administration can protect women's locker rooms, bathrooms, and sports teams. The other 30 states must allow any student in any space or risk the loss of funding.
It's not a good place to be. It's very troubling for parents. It's troubling for schools, even private schools that use federal dollars in some way.
Given the different cases and rules, schools face an ever-changing legal landscape. In the end, it could be up to the Supreme Court to decide these big questions about sexual orientation and gender identity. Gordon.
Well, Heather, Tennessee, 19 other states have sued over discrimination guidelines regarding school lunch programs. What's the concern?
This just came out yesterday, Gordon, and it's a similar playbook to what we saw in their lawsuit with the Department of Education policy. They're saying what is going to happen to schools that don't abide by this reinterpretation. Is their lunch money going to be held up? And so we'll see what happens with that lawsuit.
All right, well, the administration has now effectively changed Title IX, and it originally addressed sex discrimination in education, and specifically in college sports, and now it's going to include sexual orientation, gender identity. Let's go back to the Bostock decision. The facts underneath that is a employee, a male, with a beard, started identifying as female, and so he showed up with a beard in a dress to his job at a funeral home, taking care of grieving families. So the funeral home fired him, and then the Supreme Court said, well, sex means gender identity in employment law. You can't do that. So in a high school setting, can we expect boys to say, well, I'm now going to wear a dress, and so that allows me into the woman's locker room? Is that where we're going with this, and how do you think the Supreme Court will eventually decide it?
Yeah, such a big question right now. And in the Bostock decision, the Supreme Court explicitly said we are just talking about federal employment. We are not talking about Title IX. We are not talking about education. That's clearly in the Bostock decision. But the Biden administration says Bostock applies to Title IX. And so we, in the education world, we want to say that sex discrimination includes gender identity and sexual orientation. So that's what's at stake right now. And the Republican attorney generals are saying you can't make policy. That is for Congress to do. But the Biden administration is going ahead with this reinterpretation. Different lower courts, federal courts are beginning to question and disagree. And so if you see a lot of federal courts, lower courts disagreeing, it is most likely that it will end up in the Supreme Court.
Okay. Any suggestions for concerned parents? I mean, what do we do if the administration is going to use the school lunch program as a hammer to essentially change culture? What's a concerned parent to do?
Well, there's a couple avenues, and one is this is actually a public comment period on these changes. We've got a link on our CBN News website. So the government is taking public comment right now about these proposed changes, which aren't technically in effect yet. And this public comment period goes until September 12th. So there's that option. And then also is just parents talking with their local schools about what's going on. We're seeing parents really emerge as an important political voice in this country. And so I think schools are going to be listening even harder, if you will, right now to parents.
All right. Well, Heather, thanks for that report. And let me underline, let your voice be heard. You can be heard at the local school board, at the local city council, with your state government. But you can also be heard at the federal government. Sometimes we think the bureaucracies aren't going to respond. But if enough people raise their voice, you can actually force it.